Okay. And so we are coming back to the Yoga Sutra first chapter. And when we left in like 29, 30, 31, we made it there. Remember, we're talking about like the whole 20s, pretty much, are about trustful surrender. You know, and the idea is behind trustful surrender is there's something you are surrendering to. And so they have this whole concept of Ishvaraha, and it's a higher reality. And, you know, you can be as vague as you want to about this, but it's just some kind of, you can think about it as laws of the universe or laws of nature. You can think about it as, you know, more of a God type spirit, but it's just a higher reality that's not, like we learn, not subject to time, space, and causation like we are. And so how do we conceive of such things because we are subject to time, space, and causation? It's not comprehensible. And like, you know, we have this omniscience, not affected by karmas, because it's not part of the reality that we live in, it's a higher reality. And they said that, you know, the whole, like, just remember when you're thinking about the Yoga Sutra, that this book, this whole first chapter is about samadhi. Okay? So samadhi is absorption. And we learn that, you know, when we can rest our mind in its, you know, in control of the mind's fluctuation, that's samadhi, that's yoga, that's absorption. We learned about like the different vrittis, which was not. We learned about practicing non-attachment. And now we're saying, okay, one way is to do, they say at the end of those 20s, do japa, repetition of pranava, which could be om, could be a sound. It's your mental focus because they call it alambana. So go, alambana, alambana. But
I'm never gonna forget that, right?
alambana. So alambana is a mind support. It's a support for your mind. So it's a little bit more general than mantra. But, you know, if you're mastering the mind's fluctuations, you do, especially with the lower samadhi, you need a mind support. And one thing, you know, when you're talking about pranava or om, that alambana is equaling higher reality. So you're kind of taking something that encapsulates higher reality, like pranava or om or sound vibration, and you are resting your attention in that. And if nothing else, think about trustful surrender as giving up, surrendering your own thoughts, what your mind wants to think about, and thinking about your mental focus, your alambana.
Can you spell alambana, please?
ALAMBANA.
ALAMBANA.
Yes. Alambana. I may use that a lot for mental focus because they're not all mantras. There's yantras, there's all different. But you need a support for the mind. The mind is tricky. So tricky. And that's what we're going to see more of as we go through this. So it says basically, here's samadhi, absorption, and here's the way our mind usually works, our everyday, like running around mind. So there's things that help our mind reach samadhi. And this trustful surrender, the whole thing, and the focus on this support is something that that will help us move towards samadhi. And then at the very end, we talked about these obstacles that came up, the impediments, remember, like pain, sloth, you know what I mean? So these are things, and it said, japa, which is just repetition of the mantra, japa helps eliminate the obstacles or reduce the obstacles. So this focus, or, you know, I love the term for some absorption for samadhi. Because I feel like that's the best thing. Enlightenment is kind of, or nirvana, like no one really knows. I mean, but absorption, your mind has been absorbed in something before. You've been absorbed. And so it's just being absorbed in something that's a little higher reality. Okay? So, and then, you know, in 31, so in 30, those are the obstacles. And then in 31 are things that come along with the obstacles. So, you know, when we are careless, you know, we might have pain because we might fall down the stairs. I don't know. You know, but they all, you know, they have these, like, you know, I mean, you know, have you ever had that, like, there's nothing wrong with you physically, but, you know, you just have overwhelmed, too much to do, and that's when you hurt yourself. You fall or you do something stupid, you know, and that's kind of how this happens too. We get unconscious on one level, and then that allows the karma to slip in. You know, I had this one teacher for Ayurveda, and she talks about karmic blinders, and it was great. She's like, you know, because sometimes, you know, the idea of karma is this, to learn lessons. Like, our karma comes back, and when we transcend the lesson, we transcend the karma. You know, so it's not like a tit for tat thing. It's more like, once you have the realization, you don't have to live out the karma anymore. You can transcend your karma. But it is to teach us. So we get in these situations, and she calls it karmic blinders, because she said, you know, there are these things in your life where you would never in a million years do that, but one day you just do it. You know what I mean? Because you have the blinders on. You know?
Yeah. Like jumping off a 30-foot cliff.
Yeah.
Ohio Pop.
Yeah. Or, you know, she talked about her
I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, we just started the other teachers, don't worry about it.
Good.
So she was, I'm telling you the story about karmic blinders. So she had a sister, and she always went to India to do this stuff. And I mean, it was not an easy trip. And her sister, like, was pregnant, and it was her first pregnancy, and it was like not an easy thing to do to conceive or something like that. So the sister decided she was going to India with her, and she was like, must have been karmic blinders, because don't you know she went into labor and had to have the baby. Everybody's fine. But like, why would you even go into that situation? This is not the first time you ever go to India. You know what I mean? Or, you know, we all have those things where, like, I know better than to have done that, yet I have done that. Yeah. So.
And nobody like stops you. But if you think back when you told somebody I'm pregnant, their face was like, but they didn't say anything.
Well, for me, even if they did, I wouldn't have listened. You don't listen in those situations. You're like, doing it anyways. Yeah. So that's kind of the idea as we create these, you know, and it's usually when we're not thinking quite straight. Maybe we haven't had enough sleep, or we, you know, are totally stressed out about something else that we think this is the right thing to do, and it's a learning opportunity. So, yeah. So these are the ways, and you can also look at this as, this is the way, meditation gets interrupted. So if you meditate, and you've meditated for a long time, you'll know sometimes there are times when your practice is not as consistent as it usually is. So you slip away, get carried away with something else.
Yeah, summer that happens, I have to really watch it because my schedule's so flexible, work, so I'll be sipping my coffee and I'll be like, so I'm meditating. It's 7:00, well, I'll do yoga nidra later.
Yep, yeah, I know. So it happens, and I think that it happens to everyone, or they wouldn't have written about these things.
Right.
So we don't even have to feel bad about it because it is part of the nature of practice. So anyway, so that's just the first couple saying, hey, there are these obstacles. And so when we get further into the 30s, all of these things are about supporting your mind. So we want to do things to make samadhi easier, to make meditation easier, and there are some things we can do to kind of protect our mind. And that's what we're getting into here. Okay? So let's look at 132. Meditation on one single reality is the way to overcome these obstacles. Okay. Let's just read a little bit of that because this is going to, everything is going to be about meditation here in some way or the other. So why don't we do, if you don't mind, a paragraph at a time. You want to start?
Sure.
And we'll work through it at the end, Tatum, if that's okay.
God's grace is unconditional. It has no beginning and no end. Grace is an integral part of the seeing power of the seer and is as perfect as Ishvara herself. Grace is the intrinsic power of Ishvara. Time, space, and the law of causation have no power to stop its flow. Its healing, transforming, and illuminating effect on us is unfailing. Grace precedes our birth, accompanies us when we are born, and has been with us every moment since. Accompanied as we are by omnipresent divine grace, it makes no sense that we suffer from illness, inertia, doubt, the other 6 obstacles, and their 5 companions. And yet we are all suffering. Why?
We are victims of our karmic possessions. We are attached to our habits and find pleasure in clinging to them. Our idea of fulfillment is molded by our likes and dislikes. These in turn are shaped by our internal makeup, the subtle impressions of our thoughts, speech, and actions stored deep in our mind. In other words, we are defined by our samskaras and vasanas.
Some samskaras and vasanas, the building blocks of our personality, color our mind. They shape our perception of ourselves and the purpose of life. They mold even our ideas of bondage and freedom. Our samskaras dictate what we like or dislike, what we embrace or discard. Our beliefs have no independent status. They are simply products of our samskaras. And our samskaras stand between us and divine grace.
Because divine grace sheds the light of true understanding regarding our samskaras and their effect on us, we work hard to block its flow. Losing our most valued possessions, our samskaras, is so frightening that we prefer to reject divine grace. This rejection is too subtle for most of us to notice, but the tendency to seek fulfillment in achieving objects compatible with our samskaras is obvious. This tendency causes us to embrace familiar objects, regardless of how painful they are, rather than make an effort to renounce them.
Knowing that we love our samskaras more than we value God's grace, Patanjali again presents the infallible recipe for eliminating the conditions that block our quest for samadhi, abhyasa and vairagya. As we have seen, abhyasa is an ardent effort to retain the peaceful flow of mind, free of roaming tendencies. Vairagya is cultivating a free mind, a clear mind, free of the coloring of vasanas. Sutras 112 through 114, Patanjali explains the general nature of the practice of abhyasa, making it clear that the first prerequisite is cultivating a clear, tranquil mind. In other words, abhyasa entails cultivating a state where the mind is peaceful and flowing toward the center of consciousness. We become proficient in our practice when we do it with energy, enthusiasm, self-discipline, self-control, right understanding, and faith. Abhyasa becomes firm when done without interruption for an extended time and with reverence.
Tatum, can you read the next one?
Yep. All right. But in these earlier sutras, Patanjali does not describe the precise object of mental focus. Here in Sutra 132, which he has introduced in the context of removing obstacles to our attainment of samadhi, Patanjali prescribes a single reality, Ishvara, as the focal point. According to Vyasa in this sutra, Patanjali is making a clear statement. The practice of abhyasa entails making an ardent effort to retain the mind's peaceful flow toward a single truth, Ishvara. Ishvara-oriented abhyasa is the ultimate remedy for removing all obstacles now and forever. He tells us that in order to nullify the 9 obstacles and the 5 conditions they produce, we must direct our peacefully flowing mind towards Ishvara. That is what is meant here by abhyasa.
The purpose of this Ishvara focused practice is to attenuate the obstacles, not to reach samadhi immediately. It is understood that we have surrounded ourselves with obstacles and are undertaking our practice with a distracted and stupefied mind. It's also understood that all of our actions, including our practice, are powerfully affected by the subtle impressions of our past deeds. Furthermore, our faith in the inner divinity is superficial and experimental. Thus, the quality of our meditation on God is predictably poor. And yet we start our meditation with the hope of reaping a desirable fruit, the elimination of the 9 obstacles and their 5 companions.
The success of Ishvara-focused meditation depends on our understanding. The more clearly we understand the nature of God and his unconditional intention to help and guide the souls who have fallen into the whirlpool of samsara, the easier and more straightforward our meditation becomes. God-focused meditation requires making contemplation on Ishvara, as described in Sutras 123 through 129, part of our daily sadhana. Sutra 127 tells us Pranava, Om, is the denoter of Ishvara. We must constantly remind ourselves that Om is representative of the entire mantra, Shakti, and mantra, Shakti, and Ishvara are one and the same. In other words, mantra embodies the essence of Ishvara.
Okay, let's stop there. Because there was a lot there. I mean, so this is where he's really, like you said, he's saying, okay, now here's what you meditate on. We talked about pranava being a denoter of Ishvara. Now we're saying, if you want to remove these obstacles, you meditate on pranava, which is Om or any other mantra. Because all the mantras come from Om, and that's what he talks about here. That's what's kind of confusing. He's like, don't forget. Sometimes in the translations, pranava just means Om, but it really doesn't. It's other mantras, awakened mantras. And remember, there's this idea of, remember at the beginning, he started out saying, there's this divine grace. And we stop it. What do you think about that? What did anything come up? Has anyone?
I love pondering grace. I've for many years, and I feel like it's just what it's like. Ramdas says, everything's grace, and I think what he means is that this is what we're surrounded by. Just that energy, or whatever you want to call it, the loving grace of what the stuff we can't really point our fingers to. And then it, I guess it manifests. I'm trying to think through this because it's not just fairy dust. It's how it manifests in our life. Moments that you're like, oh, there's something embracing me. You can just feel it. Yeah, I'm not making much sense.
No, actually, that is making sense. So, how about the rest of you? Have you had a connection with this kind of idea of grace? Do you feel like you're stopping it at times? What's going on?
Do I feel like I'm stopping grace? If I exert my own will.
Yeah.
I am blocking the sunlight of the spirit. There's no goodness. Until
Yeah, I mean, when he was saying, let's look back, is that, what's going on is, because of our desires, we kind of reject grace. And I totally understand this for myself. I'm like, yeah, I know I should be doing this and this and this, but I want to do this.
Yeah.
And, that does hold you back. And honestly, it's okay. It's a human thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But sometimes you just don't want to do, what you don't want to go with the flow. And it is a little bit about will and what
what I want
what you want.
and what I don't want to lose.
Right.
And you need to do that because then you wouldn't know what grace was. You need to bump into things and have it not work really well to have that contrast so you can feel what the other thing is.
Well, there is a whole kind of pairing. There's something, when does grace come? What happens? And there is kind of a geometrical representation of it in yoga. And it's and it has to do with the third chakra, which we'll look at more when we get there. But, grace or effort is what we do. Effort is in fire, is in the shape of a triangle, So effort is what we do. It's our karma. Our karma is also what we do. So when you want to do something, they talk about a reasonable amount of effort, and too much effort and you're getting controlling. Not enough effort and nothing happens because you just are being lazy. You know what I mean? But so when you do a reasonable amount of effort, that's when grace comes down like a triangle this way. So it's like this at the heart center too. You see this symbol. So grace is the downward flowing energy, and effort is what we do up. We put out. And it's if you never do your meditation, it's hard for anything to happen. But if you do it and put a reasonable amount of effort in, it's not like you have to kill yourself and start meditating 4 hours a day. That's not necessary. But a reasonable amount of effort and things flow. And think about if you felt like you had some grace in your life. I don't know if there's a better word, but if you've had some grace in your life, it's not that you were kind of usually sitting there feeling bad about yourself. Usually it's have you ever had the things when things just click together?
Oh yeah.
And everything just seems to be clicking together. You're in the right place. Oh, you'll see this person that you just talked about. Everything's just flowing. But sometimes in that time, you're also doing something. You have this positive momentum almost that you're doing. Yeah. So what keeps us back from that is only what you have to enter in your own life. We all do our things. you know, that, you know, because you felt like you felt like you've been in the flow.
Mhm.
And then you've also felt like when you're not in the flow, when things are a little bit hard. Yeah, I mean, that's part of life too, but,
And is it the samskaras that interrupt?
yeah. Because it's that part of life, those habits that we keep repeating, or those things that come up for us to learn. You know, it's like, we'll look in book 2, it talks a lot about how karmas come back up. Like, it's like a seed. When the conditions are right, it grows.
Yeah.
And so, like, you'll see someone who maybe did something, maybe they have a karma of being fired or something like that. Let's just say that. And they get fired from their job, and then they're doing great. And there's maybe a couple of years where they're just cruising right along, then they get fired again. It's like they have a karma for that. And I'm maybe simplifying it a little bit, but sometimes, you know, there's something there that needs to be learned. And if it wasn't fully learned, like I said, you can find the lesson, but, you know, we have these patterns that we repeat. And that's maybe a little bit more obvious, but have you gotten yourself out of a bad situation only to find yourself in a similar one later in your life?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we repeat things. Maybe there wasn't something totally integrated from that experience. Maybe we learned a little bit more every time. I remember Panaji saying one time too, if you want to stop a habit, what usually makes you stop a habit?
Pain.
Unbearable conditions.
What's that?
Like I said, unbearable conditions.
Yeah. Also, you get sick of seeing yourself doing it over and over again. You just get tired of watching yourself make the same mistake. Like, you know you're doing it after a while.
Have you ever had something happen to you karmically at like smaller doses, and then the dose just keeps getting a little bigger and bigger? Like you didn't notice it enough the first time, and you were just like, "I'll just make that a little bigger for you the next time." And then it gets to a point where you're like, "Okay, I can't take it. I will change."
Oh yeah, like as a constant avoider of conflict. That's happened to me. Like I had a friend who said to me a long time ago, she was like, you know, if you ignore a problem, it doesn't mean it goes away. Yeah. And usually you know, like if you don't address it, sometimes it gets a little bigger. And I thought at the time I was like, oh crap. But I really, as I've watched life, I have seen that, like when you let things go. We were talking about ahimsa, and we're talking about doing the yamas and the niyamas. It was a little earlier, but you know that idea of sometimes you become violent because things have gotten too stressful for you, and you've hit your wall. Like then, how to guard your balance so that doesn't happen. You know.
So it sounds like the first step in not blocking grace is awareness, just right?
Yeah, it
Just
would have to be
recognizing that you're
stopping it. Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just, it's habit, it's easy, it's just what you've always done, like you don't even think about it because you just, that's how you are in this situation or you attract this kind of person.
Yeah. Motivation to change, you know, it's like,
If you don't
sometimes,
know you have a problem, you're not gonna work to change it,
right,
you know?
right,
So,
right. Yeah.
And then people who see that they have a problem and just like don't change it.
Well, that's why it has to be the person that gets sick of it themselves. You know what I mean? Like, did you read The Year of Yes, Shonda Rhimes?
You mentioned that.
Yeah, it's such a good book.
Okay.
She was like the director of all of the
Bridgerton.
Thursday night, programs.
Yeah.
Oh,
An amazing woman,
like
super funny because she created all this stuff, and so she is a great writer. So the book is really funny. But she started to, like, she had this year where she started to, her pattern she noticed was saying no. Like when she got I can't remember what talk show host wanted to have her on, whether it was Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen, no. And so she made a deal with herself that for 1 year she would say yes to everything.
Wow.
And so that's a change of a habit right there. But like what happened as she gained momentum with this, like the other thing was she was actually very overweight. And she got sick of traveling and not being able to do the seatbelt up. And she just got like, she's done with that. And so she lost all of this weight. You know, but it was like her, like, I mean, if you would have probably taken her before this time and said, oh, you should do this or you should try that, it wasn't time. And you can't do that for another person. But that's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like, you know, you get tired of feeling the way you don't want to feel or being the way you don't want to feel. And that's when the habits have to go.
Sometimes a well-placed ass kicking from a friend can help. Like I have a really good friend who was able to be very direct with me during my divorce. And she saw things, you know, that I didn't, and she didn't mince words. And that helped me, you know. I'm not saying all the time, and you know, but well-placed, you know, kind of open your eyes, just has helped me.
And can we pause in here too and say that there's some good karma too? And I really want to share this with you guys really quick because I met Billy Porter today downtown. Yeah, I was at the bus stop, which I don't know if you guys know this, I don't have a car, I haven't had one for a couple years, but that's also how I met my boyfriend Joe, because I called him Lyft Ride, and when he was driving me, we realized we'd both been in theater for years and years. So anyway, I wrote a little post on Facebook like, you know, I never thought that not having a car would open all these doors, but in letting go, because I had literally been in 6 car accidents in 4 years, and one of them was my fault, and I just needed to not be driving a car for a while. And I actually really loved my cars too, like I like driving and everything, but I was like, I feel like I'm not supposed to have one. And if I hadn't not had a car, there's no way I probably would have met Joe, but it wouldn't have been under the conditions that we met, which also was like the beginning of spring break. It was like a little bachelorette season. We like had dates every day for like a week, which was really, really wonderful. And then meeting Billy Porter today, like if I hadn't been in that spot, like he just walked by, I was like, Billy Porter, I was gonna compliment his shirt. It was a really nice pink shirt, it's got great style. And I realized it was him, and it was him. He was like, yes, he was like, do I know you? Like that. And I was like, oh, we know some of the same people. Like I know some of the jazz cats who went to school with him because I dated someone on the scene for a long time. I was like, oh, do you know this person? And he was like, yes, I know that person. And like he was like walking, and I was like, oh, nice to meet you. Like so polite and kind and nice, but just like little things like that. And it reminded me of, because I was kind of like, you know, I do a lot of public transit this week, and I was like, oh, maybe I should get another car. Like it's just a reminder that sometimes like, so for me, that karmic lesson is a little bit of like letting go and letting grace, right? Letting some good things happen to you, you know?
Yeah. It definitely can be positive too. I mean, it's definitely, but the stuff that blocks our meditation is usually not that.
Of course.
But yeah. But so we can see, like, I mean, you can kind of see the intelligence of the yoga sutra through this, because it's like every idea built on the last idea. Like we had this whole idea of trustful surrender, Ishvaraha, and now we have, and then Pranava is the denoter of that. Now we're like, meditate on this. So that's the practice. And, you know, from here, we're going to start to talk about like some of the supports for the mind that help make meditation easier and samadhi easier. So we'll see what they are. So changing to 133. There's more you can, this is like one of my favorites. Transparency of mind comes by embracing an attitude of friendliness, compassionate, happiness, and non-judgment towards those who are happy, miserable, virtuous, and non-virtuous. So let's actually just break this down. So, it's friendliness towards the happy, compassion towards suffering, cheerfulness to the virtuous. These might not be with there. It's very close. We'll talk about them. And seeing around, this is kind of not a direct, the faults of others. It's not, they call it indifference to the wicked, but indifference kind of implies to us like we don't care about them, and that's actually not. It's like not losing the sight of the person despite what they're doing. Okay.
Can you read those again, Kate?
Sure. Friendliness towards the happy, compassion towards suffering, cheerfulness towards virtuous, and seeing around the faults of others, or indifference towards the wicked is what it's translated, but that's not a translation. So, okay, so first things first. Transparency of mind comes from embracing these attitudes, which kind of means that they are not always the most natural for us to do. So it's kind of neat to look at what the opposite are. Or what do we tend to do instead of these, okay? So let's just take them one by one. Friendliness towards the happy. So when we see a happy person out there, what are some other things we might feel besides friendliness? Jealousy.
And some people get annoyed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing though.
yeah. Skepticism or like suspicion.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what are they so happy for? Or wait till the other shoe drops. You know what I mean? Like we're like, oh, wait till they find out. Like we're not, that's not what they're talking about doing here. But that's what we sometimes normally do. So we see someone that's happy and we get jealous, or we think that it's a false happiness, or they don't know the whole story, or, you know, somehow we diminish their happiness.
Why does that happen? What the heck? I mean, I know I've done that, and why?
Why?
Something in you that is
Yeah.
triggered.
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm just thinking about.
I love how it says transparency of the mind, because what you're saying right now is making me think, oh, when you're able to do that, you're not confused and cloudy, right? Like so you have a clarity of what you're seeing.
I'm just like, where did I learn, some of the bad habits?
So, okay, let's take it this way. So all of these can be done toward yourself too. So think about when you're happy, do you try to protect yourself and say,
Oh, yeah, that's
like
so
you don't
interesting.
fully live your happiness because you're what, afraid that it's gonna go away? Yeah.
I try to ride it.
I like that, yeah.
When you're happy,
I just live in that, and you know what? This too shall pass. It's like an
Yeah.
ongoing joke.
but what if you don't say this too shall pass?
Yeah,
What if
that's a way
you're
of-
just happy for yourself and you don't have to give it like, this is gonna end, or this is gonna, you're just like, oh, I'm just a happy person.
It says you're supposed to have an attitude grounded in right understanding.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times we think someone, like, say someone, they make life look easy. And they're just, and then you don't realize maybe what they did to get there.
Yeah.
You don't know the whole story of anybody. You know what I mean? So sometimes there's a jumping to conclusions, like they don't deserve it, or they didn't work hard enough, or, you know, there's a little bit of a jealousy. But the real reason well, I mean, first of all, we don't want our mind to be cloudy. Another thing is, if you see someone that has something that you like or something that you want, if you say they shouldn't have it or make excuses, you block yourself from getting it. But if you're happy for them, that can flow to you too. It's just a way of like opening the channel a little bit. So, you know, if you see someone who, I don't know,
Has a new car.
has a new car, be happy. Oh, it's so awesome that they got that. Then you're opening up channels for yourself to get certain things rather than, oh my gosh, they probably spent too much money on that thing. I wonder how much they did. That's ridiculous. You know?
Judgment.
Yeah, yeah. Animosity is the opposite here of friendliness. Any other thoughts about this one? Just see a little bit of what.
I guess I'm thinking too about that. It's almost like there won't be enough. Like I can see that mindset, like.
Yeah, they have it, so I won't have it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Or have you ever felt, this is a feeling I've had before, like someone appears to be moving ahead in their life and you feel like I'm behind, like, oh my God, you know, it reflects back like the insecurity of like, I should be at a certain place, you know? Yeah, that's how it pops up sometimes for me.
Just having a teenage daughter, so like, you know, I know a friend of hers was, she had a new boyfriend. And so she was super jealous of all these other girls on Instagram and their bikinis and stuff like that. And like, you know, the girl was worried, you know, and Abby said to her, just because another girl is really pretty does not make you not pretty. You know, and I thought, oh, well, that's super interesting. You know what I mean? Like, and, you know, sometimes with jealousy, it is that kind of like, this person has this, so there must be a lack of it. Yeah. I thought it's so hard for girls. Oh my gosh. But like, you know.
The fear of missing out. That's,
yeah.
That FOMO.
Yeah. So,
That's beautiful.
yeah, so there's kind of this thing we do, I think, because we are afraid of not getting that or not, that's not friendly and happy. I want to see what he says, though. I mean, let's go down to 162 in the bottom paragraph. And I think we left off with Susanna. Susanna, can you read that?
Sure. A mind contaminated by animosity perceives successful people as enemies. Now actively seeking fulfillment of our desire is no longer a priority. Eliminating our enemy becomes a priority. We are on the offensive in our thoughts, speech, and actions. The peaceful condition of our mind is destroyed, replaced by inner turmoil. If we do not find a timely cure for this condition, our anger intensifies. Animosity throws our mind into such turmoil that it can't think properly. An agitated mind is more interested in capturing the enemy than in meditating on a mantra. It has no inclination to reflect on Ishvara and her mantric manifestation. The mind's sattvic nature, its transparency, clarity, and illumination, is being consumed by anger and animosity. It becomes progressively darker, duller, and less competent to meditate and reflect on truth.
Okay, So Beth, can you go down to paragraphs starting with nurturing? And we'll find where there.
Nurturing a friendly attitude toward those who are successful and happy cleanses the mind of the fundamental toxin of animosity. This practice also frees the mind from its harsh, heavy properties and makes it clear and transparent so it can attend its chosen focal point without distraction.
Erin, do you want to keep going?
Sure. Cultivating a general attitude of friendship is a contemplative process. We remind ourselves that success depends on hard work and the act of divine providence. It is no accident that particular individuals are healthy, happy, peaceful, and prosperous. A long chain of good deeds led them to a positive result. We have no idea what positive karmas have intersected to lead specific individuals to a point where they seem to be successful. It is good if we can learn something from their success, but there is no need to examine their follies. For example, if we have joined an anti-corruption movement, there is no need to cultivate animosity towards politicians who have built their fortune through corrupt means. Our knowledge of their corruption must not be allowed to contaminate our mind with hatred, for by hating them, we damage our own mind. Hatred, anger, and animosity fill our mind with negativity. We cannot create a positive result with a negative mind. We are the first and foremost recipients of our own negativity. And negativity takes our mind away from the single reality, Ishvara, on which we are trying to meditate.
That's good. Thanks.
Okay. So, kind of have an idea of that one.
You gotta let go of politics.
Well, and the funny thing is, we're this way before. I mean, this is written maybe about
Way
10 years ago or 7 years ago, so that was.
I keep thinking about a story when I was pretty young actually, and I really wanted this zippy thing that pulled my shirt over the side, and I was so mad at my mom. I was like, "It's $1, just get it for me." And she was like, "Erin, you know what, tie your shirt in a knot on the side and everyone else will do it too." I was like, and I did, and that little moment really, and we talked about it afterwards too. I was like, "Wow, you're right." She's like, "Erin, first of all, why do you want a stupid $1 plastic living thing? We're gonna throw it away. You're gonna keep it for a couple days." Secondly, just take care of yourself. Be happy on your own, and other people will see how happy you are and they'll want to be happy. That was basically her message, and that's kind of what I'm getting from this too. You just take care of yourself, be happy for yourself. If you see someone else, be happy for them, and hopefully, because they're happy, maybe you take from their example of being happy and you can create your own happiness, but you can't take their happiness. So there's really no point in it. You have to create your own. Nothing external is going to make you feel as good as something you've created for yourself. That was a lot of words, but that's what I get.
No, I think that's good. Good. So our second one is compassion towards the suffering. So let's talk about what you think compassion is, because that's always interesting. What's compassion?
Caring?
Yeah.
Empathy, I think, is part of it, but it's different too.
Yeah, that's where it gets so dicey. Yeah. When it's because there's some empathy, sympathy, because compassion implies not judgment.
Right.
And a lot of times when people are suffering, as we are trying to help them, we are judging them a little bit or being condescending in some way.
Think of a holding with compassion, holding
Just not be,
space with.
to not have any self-righteousness in what you're doing, to have it be not about you.
Or attaching to their self.
Yeah, well, one thing I have kind of thought for myself is when I see someone going through a hard time, help if you can, but always believe that they can do it. Because they wouldn't have gotten that karma if they can't. You know, like never stop thinking that they have the power to do this and get themselves out of this.
That's awesome.
You know,
Well, that's actually really cool because of how, what you're saying, when you're judging someone, you're like, how, it's either like, how did you get in that split face, or
yeah,
how are you gonna get yourself out of this? But if you keep focused on,
Yeah.
you can get through this.
Yeah.
That's
So
so
lifting
empowering
them.
for them.
Yeah.
And compassionate.
yeah. Like I find myself, I think, oh, if this person would just, if that's like my thought, I'm like, oh, that's not compassion. You know, like, you know, that's not. I heard this crazy, did you ever hear that show on NPR, or Think? You heard Think?
No.
It's great. It makes you think, so I love it. But last night there was this woman, she wrote a book, she's very, I'm trying to think how to say it, she's very active in having rights for people that are disabled. And she herself is disabled. She's like the rebel in a wheelchair, you know, and she was talking about how over time, she was born in the 40s, and how over time, ways of looking at the disabled population has changed. And, it was just amazing. You know, and the roadblocks that she had faced and overcome, and I'm like, wow, this woman is amazing. She's really gonna make people think differently about people with disabilities, because I think, not intentionally, we have some cultural stuff where we're not looking at people in the most helpful ways that have disabilities. But oh my gosh, this is amazing. I mean,
What's her name?
oh, it's Debbie something, I can't remember what it is.
She was, did you see Crip Camp?
No.
I wonder if she was the one that.
She might have been.
There's one woman who was kind of the leader for the
Yeah.
revolution,
Yeah, I think she might have been it, yeah. Yeah, but I think a lot of times what it caused me to think is and a lot of it is just our culture. Like, I mean, I feel like I wasn't able to see a lot of people with disabilities because they weren't around, like somehow they were moved over here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or they weren't integrated with the rest of, and now we have so many forms of disability. It can be like, having, some, mental health issues. It can be physical disabilities. But like, I feel like, wow, I mean, I didn't really think about how it would be to be disabled. It wasn't in my mind.
Why would it be?
Yeah, right. But like, this really made me think, we as a community now, we have like a little bit of a condescending attitude towards people with disabilities, I think. A little bit. Like, I mean, I think that we're working on it. But,
Especially that mental health stigma.
Yeah, and how that's not helpful. And how we would be more empowering to, people with disabilities, which really turns out to probably be all of us, in some way, you know what I mean? If we would, be more empowering towards them. So, I was thinking about this, and not that they're suffering, because compassion towards suffering, but, if you need to help someone, like, one thing she said was like, it was really hard because you wouldn't want to have your teacher or an older person push you down the hall in your wheelchair. You would want to ask one of your peers to do it. You wanted to have friends that were your peers. But you were afraid to ask because what if someone said no? What would you do? I'm like thinking, who would say no? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But can you imagine being in that situation? Like crazy.
Having to ask for help is hard. So if you're born into a position where you need to do that in order to get by, it's tough.
That's why often, like you'll offer somebody assistance, would you like, they'll say no. Maybe it's because, you know, the handicapped person is rooted in not being able to ask, so they'll say no and just do it on their own.
I'm sure there's a lot of karma in a lot of ways all around it. It's just, yeah, it's just such an interesting thing. Like, and I hope we all just get, like, I know I'm totally unaware, and I probably, it's just because of, I'm really trying to be aware. I realize that I'm not, just because of the way I grew up. But, you know, hopefully, as a culture, we're going to get more and more and more, as these kind of brilliant people come forward and educate us, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, but like, that's what I mean, thinking about compassion, that kind of really kind of struck me last night when I was listening to that, because I didn't even realize it was kind of a, you know.
I just looked down while you were saying that, and my eyes went to practicing compassion is more subtle and potent than practicing friendship, and it requires greater understanding and skill. Why am I reading this?
Yeah, go ahead, we'll start reading it.
For example, practicing compassion involves more than serving the poor and the sick, more than opposing war or campaigning against human trafficking. The practice of compassion begins with discovering and acknowledging the injured person in us.
Back to like the yamas and yamas and
So why we can't is because it touches something in us that's not healed.
It's so interesting. So I was talking about the movie Crip Camp, it's an amazing.
What is it again?
Crip Camp. So
Like
it was
cripple,
short for cripple.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
awesome.
So it was a camp in the 60s where people who had disabilities would go, and from that was born this movement that created the what's the
American Disabilities Act.
yes, yeah. And the very beginning, the beginning of the documentary shows footage of these people who were at the camp, and it's really difficult. Like, I found it really difficult to watch.
Yeah.
And because, like you said, I haven't really been around, and it's a whole camp. Like, everyone that went there had some kind of some don't have arms, some don't have, you know.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting. Like, I found myself saying, like, what is it about this that is making me so uncomfortable? You know, and I don't know if I really came up with an answer for it, but as you watch the movie and you hear these people, it was like a camp, like they were teenagers, kids fell in love, they fooled around, they got drunk, they were just like kids.
Yeah.
And it was just a very interesting, like, lesson for me to, like, just like, what is it that's, and, by the end of the movie, you're just, it's very well done. I really highly recommend watching it. I think it's on Netflix, yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so I'm just trying, because it was just that, like, that discomfort, but I was aware that like, I actually had to stop it, and I came back a few days later and continued watching it, and I'm so glad I did, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting.
I think, like, this is uncomfortable, so I'm not gonna deal with this, just like, I turned it off, but then I came back.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting,
Yeah.
because when you face it within yourself, then you're able to hopefully heal it or get through it, and then compassion.
Yes, yeah.
Imagine, that's what the whole story of the Buddha was, right? He was so protected in his kingdom, and he was not allowed to see sickness, old age, or death. And when he went out, it was so overwhelming that that's what made him, do what he did, create the middle path, and yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was in elementary school, I volunteered for a day where they brought in special needs kids, and I had never, ever been around. And there was people like in wheelchairs where they had to have their, the saliva. I was so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because I was like, so I knew exactly what you're talking about. It's like, how do you even process that? Um,
Yeah. I grew up with a cousin who had such an unfortunate accident when she was so young. She was playing with the garage door, her mother fell asleep and she got her neck stuck under, like flighted. This was, 20 years ago almost now. And so she's been in a wheelchair, feeding tubes, everything you're talking about. Every time I see her, I just walk up to her and give her a kiss because I know that inside is
right.
her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that you hear a lot about parents who have Down syndrome kids who didn't think that they'd be able to be a parent in that situation. You talk about how it uplifts them
Yeah.
and changes them because I wish it was different abled instead of disabled because
Yes.
people just take that into such a context.
Yes.
And cruel.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all, yes, you're right.
Do you think the disabled look at it like that? Or is it our shame or guilt that makes us perceive that?
They might see themselves.
I think because it's hard, when you're being observed a certain way not to feel that.
That's not been my experience with disabled.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I find them, I don't know.
Some are
I
stronger.
have
than
a
others.
woman that I went to Georgetown with, and she had a cardiac condition and they had an amputee. This woman manipulated, it was like art, the crutches under her arms, carrying the lunch tray. Look at me and like, Juanette, I'm gonna open the door for you. Balance on the crutches, kick with one leg, there goes the door. Yeah, thanks, high five, Then on the other hand, we're out drinking in a bar one night. She leaves with the military guy and he rapes her.
Oh, what?
God. He rapes her and she couldn't get out of the bond. I don't know. It's still if you're drinking, but or an overpower.
Or just being in a horrible situation, yeah.
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 But the resilience and the strength, I'm so greatly, for the most part, impressed. And maybe that's not even a good feeling for me to be impressed. Is that expressing compassion?
I think that
Or
actually
accept?
you have to just, the more important thing is to be curious about whatever it is, not right or wrong. Like if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel not, just ask yourself, oh, this is interesting. Not like I should be, because it's so, like, I think we're judgmental for ourselves too. Like we said, the first one,
Yeah.
we do this to ourselves. And like, if we're just trying to be right all the time and do the right thing, that's not true either.
Yeah.
We have to let ourselves be who we are,
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like,
And educators, I mean, if you find a better way or someone tells you something, like, and that is where I feel like, you said the well-placed words of a friend.
Yeah.
I do think we're all in that situation now as we're broadening our minds and seeing things different ways, we can be open to someone that may see something a little differently and help us if we don't see it that way.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's huge.
yeah, it is.
Yeah. But, super interesting. And I do, really think that that's where he is going with this, is that it does, practice of compassion begins with discovering and acknowledging the injured person in us. So let's pick up there. Tatum, do you know where we are? Can you read the first step?
Okay, what page?
We're on 165, like second
160.
paragraph down.
Okay. Practicing, or the first step, yeah. You said the first step, correct?
Yep. Mhm.
Sorry, the first, okay. The first step is to recognize where our own thoughts and feelings have been hurt. We must explore the scars in our own minds and hearts and heal our own emotional injuries, a process Patanjali describes in greater detail in Sutra 136. The pain caused by emotional injuries has a powerful effect on our personality. It distorts our worldview and forces us to be hypervigilant. Suspicion becomes embedded in our character. We are constantly on the offensive, quick to hurt others, slow to forgive, and insensitive to the injuries and pain of others. We are drawn to painful thoughts and memories.
So I'll I'll read this one. Our inability to bear our painful thoughts and memories makes us angry with ourselves. As a coping strategy, we pour out our anger on those who are weak and helpless. This behavior is completely unconscious. Thank goodness. We are unaware that the irritable and insensitive part of our personality is taken over. If left unchecked, this behavior becomes a breeding ground for violence and cruelty. Thus, the practice of compassion begins with healing our own internal injuries. Self-destructive behavior.
Don't eat too much, Scar. I'm making lasagna. Oh, sorry.
Good advice. Thus, the practice of compassion begins with healing our own internal injuries. Self-destructive behavior and compassion do not go together. To practice compassion, we must first heal ourselves and rise above the turbulence caused by our own internal pain. Okay, so I think we're good there. That'll give us enough to think about. I know, these are, I mean, I do whole retreats on this sutra because I think they're so fun and interesting to think about.
I feel like practical. Like you
So practical, like, yeah, I'm gonna work on just one of them. Or like you find yourself, why am I feeling such, you know, non-compassion for, you know, whatever, and you can ask yourself, why? Why is this coming up for me right now? So anyways, so the next one is tricky because it seems very similar to the first one, is cheerfulness towards those who are virtuous. But, you know, what this had meant in this text anyways, and you can see it a little bit, is, you know, when someone seems to be like a little bit further ahead spiritually or something like that, or on a pedestal a tiny bit, there's something in us that rebels in us, them falling off the pedestal. So think, like I just saw there's a new movie of Tammy Faye Baker. Yeah, someone I saw there's a new movie, it's a story of her life.
Yeah.
Where the actress got totally made up, and she just looks like a different person. And I just remember that whole story. You know what I mean? These stories of these people that seem so perfect. And then there's like a fall from grace.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's something in us that may like to enjoy kind of seeing the fall from grace.
Has anyone here ever been that person?
Oh, many times. Yeah. Yes. It's just, yeah, I mean, you're being human. People have expectations for you, and then it's hard.
We have expectations for us.
Right.
I
But
live up to my own expectations.
yeah, it's like somehow this person seems like more than human. Or look at like the whole thing with all the yoga gurus, all these sexual
Yeah,
abuse.
It's like
What was that movie you told me about it several years ago? It was the comedy about the guru, the fake guru.
Oh, Kumari.
Oh, that was so.
Oh, it's so weird. I was just thinking about the other night.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's this guy he's an Indian, and from India, and he pretends he's a guru, and he wants to see if he can trick people, and he amasses this great following,
Oh my gosh.
and then he lets them know he tricks them, and they're so mad,
Yeah.
and it's great. It's
It
so
is, it
funny.
really
It's like you almost have to watch these
It's
things
like
if you're going to practice
Borat.
yoga.
Yeah. You know.
What is it a movie?
Yeah,
What's it called?
Kumare.
It was on Netflix. And yes.
Kumari is.
It's so funny.
Spell that with a K?
K. Yeah, Kumare, I think.
Because C is.
Because it was so funny. I mean, but like, yeah, but even like, you know, think about Ashtanga yoga. Like, okay, this is, I'm gonna be honest about what my reaction was. Like, oh, like it was so popular, blah, blah, blah. And I did like a lot of things. I like the spiral things and like, I mean, but then when I heard, I was like, oh, Jonathan, I knew there was something about him. It's horrible. It's horrible that I did that. But yeah, that's kind of what we do. That's what this one's talking about.
And what would the compassionate voice say?
The cheerful. Oh my gosh, this guy has achieved this spiritual heights that I have never only dreamed of.
Yeah.
No, I would never do that either.
How wonderful it must be for him.
How wonderful, yeah.
No, that he fell from grace. Like,
Oh,
yeah, what's the compassionate voice say about that other than,
well, everybody's human.
Yeah.
You know, it would be like a kind of unrealistic to expect this person to be, you know, without fault. I mean, I guess you can see this too, like with celebrities and stuff like that.
doctors, some people
Yeah.
pretend they're doctors, they're crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, but there's this idea of, and like, I mean, I think it's also rooted in jealousy a little bit, like the first one. And I think sometimes when you see someone who's a little further ahead than you are, sometimes there's like a kind of sadness in you because you know if you would have made different choices, you might be there too.
And recently, I keep going back to Ron Thomas, but.
I know, it's a good one to go back to,
Yes.
I know.
But I was listening to one of his podcasts, and I know I've heard this before, but something in what he said was, because he talks a lot about accepting your karma and working with it, and just, this is your journey. This is your journey. And it hit me like, yeah, I'm gonna start liking my journey, more often. Even, I don't know, it's just a little itty bitty shift that this isn't about, because I've had the comparison thing. And like, oh, I must be doing something wrong, or, but no, that podcast really kind of shifted something for me. And he talks about himself,
I know, that's the greatest thing.
it's the greatest thing, how kind of conceited he was, and
Yeah, till the end. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
And that was like kind of what was charming about him,
yeah,
is that he was that way. I mean, and that's like, that's what, the first thing I read about from this tradition was Living with the Himalayan Masters. You've seen that book. It's about Swami Rama's, it's like a autobiography that he tells of his time with studying with different masters. And I loved it because he was so bad. Like he did like really bad things. Like he played tricks on people or like, and I thought it was so funny, and so humorous that, and that made it like something I would want to do.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's okay not to be perfect in this, but yeah, as far as this one goes, it's being, in the Bhagavad Gita too, which we'll look at next segment, there's this whole idea that you have your Dharma. Your Dharma is what's yours to do, and we'll talk about more of that. But it's a really kind of dangerous territory to get into when you're trying to live someone else's Dharma. You only want to live your own Dharma. It's what's yours to do, and other people do what is theirs to do. Sometimes we see somebody doing something and we're like, I want to do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then in a good state of meditation, you might realize, yeah, that's like a grandiose thought sometimes. Oh, I was really proud of that.
Yeah.
It's energy something.
Well, because
When you start
if you
doing
don't, what happens is you don't feel good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't feel good. That's energy sucking. So if like you're looking at yourself and you're comparing and you're falling short, then you're the one who ends up feeling like you're not good enough. So
Or you doubt, like I'll doubt myself, like let's just say, okay, everyone's buying houses now. Why do I not want to buy a house? Should I want to buy a house? I don't really feel like buying a house, but everyone's in a frenzy to buy a house, so maybe, so I start questioning that sometimes. It's not that bad, but
yeah.
Don't buy a house now. Sell your house now.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Now is not the time. Wait till not everybody wants to buy a house and buy a house. Yeah.
I rent, so I'm like,
Yeah. See, but So that, so it's seeing other people that seem to have, some kind of, goodness about them and being happy for them too. Yeah.
Sometimes there's sibling rivalry, and there's like this little competition. It's hard
Many
when it's a
times.
family member.
Yeah. Yeah.
I struggle.
I know. Families are inherently difficult.
It's tough.
Yeah.
So my mother is placed on this earth, and the lessons to be learned right now are compassion, patience, and tolerance.
I've just thought about this with families. I've been talking to people about their families, and I'm like, what if we just all decided that we were not going to have any family drama? Like, we're just not going to participate in whatever were the usual things that our family does.
Yeah.
We're just not playing.
We call that not
You know,
stepping
sometimes
in
if you
the
remove
fire.
yourself from those cycles, you actually break them.
Yeah, I'm thinking that might be, like, since we were talking, my son's going on vacation with his girlfriend, and he's like, but there's always so much family drama. And I'm like, oh, vacations kind of bring this up when families are together. I said, so have you ever been on a vacation where there's no drama? And he said, yeah. When I went with my friends last year to Deep Creek. And I was like, yeah, that's why we go on vacation with our friends. But like, what if we could bring that attitude towards our family and just be like hanging out with family and being like, I'm not participating in the drama.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I've had practice at this, and it takes things that you want to say and you hold back, or as you continue to sit back and watch everybody at the table, like slowly over time, you can change how you would normally respond. And at first you can see, oh yeah, last time I would have jumped in and done this, and then the pot would have been stirred, and then they would have started fighting, and it's a term that has been coined is keeping myself out of the fire. Like, don't step in.
Yeah.
But
Do not
oh my
engage.
God, with my mother and my sister, sometimes you just want to freaking step in. And it's so hard.
Yeah, so why is because we've had, everything's based on our habit patterns and our strong scars. So with these family members, we've been doing this with them for a long time.
Yeah.
We have these relationships with these people that we've just actually been doing for a really long time, so they're strong, and
I have a friend who was a recovering alcoholic, and he was at an AA meeting one time, and it was close to the holidays, and someone in the group said, I just can't go back to my family. They push all my buttons. And the leader said, well, of course they do. They install them.
yeah, I love it.
I just love that.
love
Like, perfect.
They install them, yes. Yeah, that's perfect.
So, yeah, my mom installed somebody. My Aunt Ellen and Uncle Harry were drunk one night. They decided to fight. My mother looked at me and she said, you have to stop that. Because I used to be the savior. I'd go in and try to fix and keep the peace. And I finally learned. I looked at my mother and I said, how could I possibly do that?
Yeah.
And she just didn't want to even accept my answer because I stopped the pattern of behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
But to see that, yeah, it's so long evolution.
It is a very, and it's like the karmas, when we can see it, we can transcend it.
Yeah.
But you have to see it first. So now our last group, seeing around the faults of others. So let's look at this. Let's do. So in the original translation, it's kind of like we're talking about wicked people. So who are wicked people? What would we say is wicked?
Someone who intentionally hurts someone else, or
Yeah.
criminals.
someone who rapes someone with a disability.
Yeah,
So what do we usually feel towards these people?
serious hatred.
Disgust. So, what are we wanting to do instead?
Like, I would say, pray for them. Tune into their, realize that they've got a heart, somewhere in there that's just been covered over, and like, almost like that childlike essence that's still in there. It helps me soften about things like that, sometimes too much, like,
That makes me think of my mama used to say, everybody was somebody's baby.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, right,
That's what you're saying.
yeah. It's like, when I watch movies like Dead Man Walking,
Oh, I love that movie. I was talking about that the other night. That's so
I
weird.
was, with the guy on death row,
Sean Penn? Great acting.
Like, oh my God, almost too much. And at that point, it's probably not really action. It's,
Well, that's the problem. That's the sticky situation.
Yeah.
And it's especially when people have bad habits, like a lot of times, what's the opposite of, seeing around the faults of others? Getting involved. So there's sometimes some enabling.
yeah, yes.
You know what I mean?
Codependence.
Codependence,
Yeah,
and that might be some of the reasons why these things fester and manifest in the way they do, is because there's some enabling problems. But for me, like, if you look at some of the really crazy, like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, let's just say they had something broken in their brain,
yeah,
and doesn't mean they didn't have a good part of them.
yeah,
And doesn't mean we do not need to protect ourselves,
right.
because that's the problem, is that we become enmeshed, and think about like addiction and something like that. Like sometimes, there's a lot of shame involved. And shame doesn't help anyone, as far as I can see, get out of their negative habit patterns. They feel bad about themselves, and it doesn't really help lift them out, So it's like, it's kind of like having boundaries. There's some boundaries implied in this, where we don't get to go down with the ship, let's say, but we still care. It's a tricky one.
It is tricky because when you start setting boundaries, for me, it's like, it feels so mean, even though it's not, and it feels harsh. But,
The more you practice that, the better it feels.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I found.
No is a complete sentence.
Yeah,
Love that.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
I've been practicing.
And well, let's see what he says about it. I'll just take away
What is that, 1-3?
So we're down, okay, 167, bottom paragraph. So can you start?
The fourth contaminant that clouds the mind is self-righteousness. The antidote is practicing an attitude of non-judgment toward those classified as sinners. The concept of vice is more deeply ingrained in us than the concept of virtue. The concepts of sin and hell occupy more room in religious texts than the theories and practices that bring a positive change here and thereafter. Every religion has its own definition of sin, and even though these definitions are often childish, people take them seriously. Further, the scope of sin and sinful acts is so broad that few people escape being stamped as a sinner by someone. We tend to associate with those whose beliefs and values are similar to ours. The desire to be recognized as a good person within our own group causes us to discover and highlight bad attributes in others. The search for sin and sinners becomes our primary focus, and the quest to know the truth is forgotten. If this tendency is not checked, our inner world grows steadily darker, and we eventually lose our capacity to comprehend true spiritual values.
As a society, we've become addicted to condemning others on the ground of pity-driven differences. It is obvious that this has caused an enormous amount of pain, but what is not so obvious is the powerful negative effect this attitude has on our personal growth. As a part of nature's design, we are more adept at seeing things outside us than inside us. This makes it much easier to see a sinner outside us than to see the very element of sin within ourselves. We waste our time criticizing others. Our priority becomes correcting those we deem to be on the wrong path rather than discovering our own source of peace and happiness. As a result, we begin walking backward. Patanjali tells us that to overcome this problem, we must stop judging those who, in light of our personal beliefs, are sinful.
The term for cultivating a non-judging attitude is upeksha, right?
Upeksha.
Upeksha. Although it is frequently translated as indifference, this is not what Patanjali means. Upeksha is a composite of upa, near, closely, and iksha, to see. It means to see closely or to see in the proper context. For example, theft and violence are generally regarded as sinful. The more poverty and illiteracy in a community, the more theft and violence there is likely to be. This does not mean the poor and illiterate are sinful. Practicing upeksha in relation to the poor, illiterate people caught in the painful cycle of theft and violence means understanding them in their context. This enables us to see them as downtrodden fellow beings and to develop love and genuine compassion for them.
Okay. Keep going, Beth. This is going to reiterate what we're trying to do here.
The purpose of cultivating the 4 positive attitudes highlighted in the sutra is to instill higher virtues in our mind, which we also call Shukla Dharma. These virtues allow our mind to reclaim its natural, pristine, joyful state. A joyous mind has all the ingredients to become one-pointed and flow peacefully toward the center of consciousness.
Thanks. So this is one of the ways we protect the mind. We're going to see more, as we go through the 30s. This is a powerful one, though. I mean, this is all, just let me give you a preview. There's a cave of the heart meditation, and it's done in a lot of different traditions in some way. And that's what we're leading up to in the 30s. And one thing that Pandit says is that he says, like, don't put clean food in a dirty bowl. But that's what he says. But like, what he's meaning is, like, sometimes when you're working on the heart, you want to purify what's in there first and help get out some of the stuff that, so you can lift yourself up. So we'll talk a little bit, we'll come back, but I just want to do a little bit of outline here so you see where we are. If you turn to the next page, it says transparency of mind also becomes by practicing pranayama that involves forceful exhale and breath retention. So here we are doing all this work with our relationships and stuff. That's one way. And another way is pranayama. Like, it's kind of crazy, but these are all techniques to help us let our mind become transparent. And here we're not talking about, we're talking about the most advanced form of pranayama, and we can look at this a little bit more because I do try to teach this to you during this training. This is the one place where we'll just see how you feel about it. Like, the last group did not feel comfortable going through the breath retention because a lot of them had some breath-related anxiety, so you don't want to have that. But if you want to and it feels comfortable, we can start to build our practice with our pranayama where we work towards the retention. And it really, there is a program here. I mean, it's not like you refine the breath, you work with certain pranayama practices, and then it's a natural thing that develops over time. So we could start working with that a little bit in the coming sessions. And some of you have done a lot of it. A lot of it's based on Vastrika breath and combining Vastrika breath with sort of like an alternate nostril, like the Anuloma, Viloma, the Surya Bedi, and then then there's this special one that's almost like if you've done with me the Vastrika combined with the Ujjayi breath. That is kind of like the one right before the breath retention. There's other ways, of course, but that's the one that they're saying, and he's doing the commentary on. So just saying that we can work on that. We'll come back to that. Skip 135. It's another way to be transparent. I just want to look at 136. So this sutra is Vishoka va Jyotishmati. It's on page 187. We're not going to get into it. We're done here pretty much. I just want to say, in the Asatoma, when we say Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Jyotish is from the same root, and it means infused with light. So this is, Vishoka means free from sorrow, without grief. And so this is a practice that it's the lotus of the heart. It's done in a lot of different traditions in a lot of different ways. But basically at the heart center, you cultivate this space that's infused with light where no negativity can stay. And so that's the whole practice we're leading up to. And it's a special practice in our tradition, but really it's a special practice everywhere. Like, and they have different representations of it geometrically in the heart center. Like in Christianity, a lot of times it's a sacred heart or a cross where the downward flowing energy is a little bit bigger than that upward. So it's like that pattern. Star of David in Judaism, lotus in Buddhism or Hinduism. There's all different ways of practicing this, but it's very common across all traditions. It's just, sometimes we use a methodology to get there, but then in the end you can learn to just feel it and go there. And it's a really great support to lift your mind up and let your mind be transparent, because a lot of times it gets bogged down. And I know I really kind of leaned on this practice a lot since COVID, because sometimes it's overwhelming, and so I'm like, okay, I just came to the heart. I can do this meditation, and it helps. It really helps energetically to lift you up a little bit.
So Vishoka meditation is cave with the heart?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's a system. Vishoka means without grief.
Okay.
And this is where he's taking, it is. But what you're seeing right now in Vishoka is there's a lot of head stuff going on. Like you have all these chakras in your head. And so you're learning about all these craziness in the human. Think about our animal body. Like this head has all this stuff in it.
Yes.
Like this tube that's crazy with senses. And so a lot of it is learning to let go of, reset the nervous system and let go and learn to meditate and learn to anchor your mind to something, Vishoka meditation. But this particular, the way I've always been taught it, I'm not saying it's the only way, is that it's a meditation that's at the heart center.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll learn it. But I wanted to point, like that's, all of that, like sometimes you're like, where am I going to find that practice or whatever? It's all in the Yoga Sutra.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it'll tell you how to do the.
No.
No.
Because It won't. I have some things that are written about it, but like, I can tell you this, like, there's ways to learn it, and then I learned it, and then I'm like, no, you don't have to do that anymore. Like, it's like, you know, it's because really what you're trying to do is get someone to connect with this feeling or this energy. And there may be a lot of different ways to do that. And then once they're there, they don't have to go through that path anymore. They already know how to get there.
We know how, what it feels like.
Mhm. Yeah. So, this is another way to make the mind transparent. And then all the way through the Sutras 50, we talk about making the mind transparent so that the mind becomes like a crystal and like it reflects anything that comes next to it. So if your mantra's right next to it, that's what it's reflecting, and you're resting in your own true nature. So, I mean, it's a journey to get there. We're getting there. But I think these are the most interesting ideas in the sutras in the 30s that we covered. So we'll look at the other ones briefly, but like for this is really the heart of it. This is where we can practice. We can practice in our relationships with ourselves and with other people. You know, we can work on pranayama. We can learn Cape of the Heart meditation. These are all things that we can do. And then the other ones are a little bit more esoteric. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a lot. So any last thoughts for tonight?
Is Cave of the Heart meditation similar to loving kindness meditation? Is it the same, like?
It can be a similar feeling, but not a focus. It's not like, may I be filled with loving kindness. It's actually, like I said, there is a visualization that goes with it that we can learn that has a lotus flower and the elements. And it has different mantras. But then again, you don't need that. So maybe the feeling of loving kindness is kind of the same thing because it produces that feeling.
Right, kind of wondering if it was, they're both looking towards the same.
I think so, because like, you know, in loving kindness, you're looking for an elevated feeling that negativity can't really stay in, and so that could be a light that's produced there.
Is that true in the breath retention too, an elevated feeling?
Well,
It gives you an elevated.
it does. The pranayama, and that's what we'll see later in book 2, and then a couple times that pranayama is referred to, is that it thins the veil between the highest reality and the ordinary self. So what that means is that you're going to be able to focus more on whatever your focus is when you do pranayama. And you'll probably feel that in class. Like if you come in, like I said, a lot of times I will have people do Kapalabhati when they come into class, sit down, because that naturally turns their attention inward. That can be like a way to center.
Yeah.
And if you practice pranayama as part of your meditation practice, you know what it does, because it really does draw your attention inward and help you anchor when you get to the mantra a little bit more easily. So, I know there's a lot of stuff. So,
Put it all in an hour and a half.
well,
I can't.
yeah. Well, that's what I think too. Like, I mean, some of this I'm going to ask you, okay, can you try to teach this or practice teach it? But a lot of it, you're not even going to think about it because you've learned it. It's going to come through in your teaching in different ways. It doesn't have to be like so
Planned.
structured
Yeah.
or planned.
Selfless surrender.
Trustful surrender.
Trustful surrender.
Yes.
Go with the flow.
Yeah.
No expectation.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being so flexible and coming tonight. And I'll get the recordings up there. Like I said, I'll get your reflection things out to you. So,
And you guys
bye,
started,
Tatum.
did you guys start with the practice?
We did. It's on there. It will be on there. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So
Crush me, Beth.
I hope it doesn't crush her.